and then peanut powder. What do the library? In the library, little Ferdinand, the dance, no. And I'm flying. Now, what to laugh my baby? It's so fun. Hey, now. What to laugh my baby?
Welcome to the MasterMind Library. I am.
I am.
They call me Ferdinand. The bringer of balance, leader of many disciplines, and one of your hosts of the MasterMind Library, the home of the MasterMind Book Club on FHTII.com. And today we are here with our co-host, Trigger. Trigger, how you doing today? Oh, that's how you doing? Oh, okay, all right. Okay, all right. Well, hey, Trigger, why don't you, Trey, why don't you introduce our live audience? Yeah. Who's over there?
Huey, and Jaja, Titia.
Very good. Good job. Good job.
Good job.
Very good. Very
and
good.
A blue now. And a blue.
All right. So we are at episode 113 in the MasterMind Library podcast. And in Simulacra Simulation, which is our current book, we are going to chapter 13 today. All right. So let's go ahead and hop on in there. Chapter 13. All right. So let's go to page 85. I think that might be 85. All right, so let's see. Where are we at? We're on chapter 13. I think that's Simulacra and Science Fiction, but let's verify. All right, Simulacra and Science Fiction. This is our chapter 13. All right, so let's go ahead and get there.
You doing
all right, Trey? No. We're going to have to take a break from Iron Man. Okay. We're going to have to go ahead and get prepared for nap time. Okay. Yep, getting you a little bit of sleep. That'll be good for you. All right, let's see what's going on here. All right, so let's see. All right, Simulacra and Science Fiction. You ready to take nap time?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's do nap time. Come on. Oh, big boy. All right. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and make this a little bit larger for everybody, and then we're going to go ahead and get started. Let's do, boom, there we go. All right, Simulacra and Science Fiction. 3 orders of simulacra. Simulacra that are natural, naturalist, founded on the image, on imitation and counterfeit, that are harmonious, optimistic, and that aim for the restitution or the ideal institution of nature made in God's image. Simulacra that are productive, productivist, founded on energy, force, its materialization by the machine and in the whole system of production. A Promethean aim of a continuous globalization and expansion, of an indefinite liberation of energy. Desire belongs to the utopias related to this order of simulacra. Simulacra of simulation, founded on information, the model, the cybernetic game, total operationality, hyper reality, aim of total control. To the first category belongs the imaginary of the utopia. To the second corresponds science fiction, strictly speaking. To the third corresponds, is there an imaginary that might correspond to this order? The most likely answer is that the good old imaginary of science fiction is dead, and that something else is in the process of emerging, not only in fiction, but in theory as well. The same wavering and indeterminate fate puts an end to science fiction, but also to theory as specific genres. There is no real, there is no imaginary, except at a certain distance. What happens when this distance, including that between the real and the imaginary, tends to abolish itself, to be reabsorbed on behalf of the model? Well, from one order of simulacra to another, the tendency is certainly toward the reabsorption of this distance, of this gap that leaves room for an ideal or critical projection. This projection is maximized in the utopian, in which a transcendent sphere, a radically different universe takes form. The romantic dream is still the individualized form of utopia. You need to put your legs down. Down. Put the pillow down. Put your legs down. You're not listening. Put your legs down. Move your book. You need to lay that way. You're not listening. You need to lay that way. There you go. All right. The projection is maximized in the utopian, in which a transcendent sphere, a radically different universe, takes form. The romantic dream is still the individualized form of utopia, in which transcendence is outlined in depth, even in unconscious structures. But in any case, the dissociation from the real world is maximized. The island of utopia stands opposed to the continent of the real. This projection is greatly reduced in science fiction. It is most often nothing other than an unbounded projection of the real world of production, but it is not qualitatively different from it. Mechanical or energetic extensions, speed, and power increase to the nth power, but the schemas and the scenarios are those of mechanics, metallurgy, etc. Projected hypostasis of the robot to the limited universe of the pre-industrial era. Utopia opposed an ideal, alternative universe to the potentially infinite universe of production. Science fiction adds the multiplication of its own possibilities. This projection is totally reabsorbed in the implosive era of models. The models no longer constitute either transcendence or projection. They no longer constitute the imaginary in relation to the real. They are themselves an anticipation of the real, and thus leave no room for any sort of fictional anticipation. They are immanent, and thus leave no room for any kind of imaginary transcendence. The field opened is that of simulation in the cybernetic sense, that is, of the manipulation of these models at every level, scenarios, the setting up of simulated simulations, etc. But then nothing distinguishes this operation from the operation itself and the gestation of the real. There is no more fiction. Reality could go beyond fiction. That was the surest sign of the possibility of an ever increasing imaginary. But the real cannot surpass the model. It is nothing but its alibi. The imaginary was the alibi of the real in a world dominated by the reality principle. Today, it is the real that has become the alibi of the model in a world controlled by the principle of simulation. And paradoxically, it is the real that has become our true utopia, but a utopia that is no longer in the realm of the possible, that can only be dreamt of as one would dream of a lost object. Perhaps science fiction from the cybernetic and hyperreal era can only exhaust itself in its artificial resurrection of historical worlds, can only try to reconstruct in vitro, down to the smallest details, the perimeters of a prior world, the events, the people, the ideologies of the past, emptied of meaning, of their original process, but hallucinatory with retrospective truth. Thus, in Simulacra by Philip K. Dick, The War of Secession, gigantic hologram in the three dimensions in which fiction will never again be a mirror held toward the future, but a desperate re-hallucination of the past. We can no longer imagine any other universe. The grace of transcendence was taken away from us in that respect, too. Classical science fiction was that of an expanding universe. Besides, it forged its path in the narratives of spatial exploration, counterparts to the more terrestrial forms of exploration and colonization of the 19th and 20th centuries. There is no relationship of cause and effect there. It is not because terrestrial space today is virtually coded, mapped, registered, saturated, has thus, in a sense, closed up again in universalizing itself, a universal market, not only of merchandise, but of values, signs, models, leaving no room for the imaginary. It is not exactly because of this that the exploratory universe, technical, mental, cosmic, of science fiction has also ceased to function, but the two are narrowly linked. And they are two versions of the same general process of implosion that follows the gigantic process of explosion and expansion characteristics of past centuries. When a system reaches its own limits and becomes saturated, a reversal is produced. Something else takes place in the imaginary as well. Until now, we have always had a reserve of the imaginary. Now the coefficient of reality is proportional to the reserve of the imaginary that gives it its specific weight. This is also true of geographic and spatial exploration, when there is no longer any virgin territory, and thus one available to the imaginary. When the map covers the whole territory, something like the principle of reality disappears. In this way, the conquest of space constitutes an irreversible crossing toward the loss of the terrestrial referential. There is a hemorrhaging of reality as an internal coherence of a limited universe. Once the limits of this universe recede into infinity, the conquest of space that follows that of the planet is equal to dematerializing human space, or to transferring it into a hyperreal of simulation. Witness this two-bedroom kitchen shower put into orbit, raised to a spatial power, one could say, with the most recent lunar module. The everydayness of the terrestrial habitat itself elevated to the rank of cosmic value, hypostatized in space, the satellization of the real in the transcendence of space, is the end of metaphysics, the end of the phantasm, the end of science fiction. The era of hyperreality begins. From then onward, something must change. The projection, the extrapolation, the sort of pantographic excess that constituted the charm of science fiction are all impossible. It is no longer possible to fabricate the unreal from the real, the imaginary from the givens of the real. The process will, rather, be the opposite. It will be to put decentered situations, models of simulation in place, and to contrive to give them the feeling of the real, of the banal, of lived experience. To reinvent the real as fiction, precisely because it has disappeared from our life. A hallucination of the real, of lived experience, of the quotidian, but reconstituted, sometimes down to disquietingly strange details, reconstituted as an animal or vegetal reserve, brought to light with a transparent precision, but without substance, derealized in advance, hyper realized. In this way, science fiction would no longer be a romantic expansion with all the freedom and naivety that the charm of discovery gave it, but quite the contrary. It would evolve implosively in the very image of our current conception of the universe, attempting to revitalize, reactualize, we re-quotidianize fragments of simulation, fragments of this universal simulation that have become for us the so-called real world. Where would the works be that would meet? Here and now. This situational inversion, this situational reversion. Obviously, the short stories of Philip K. Dick gravitate in this space, if one can use that word, but that is precisely what one can't really do anymore, because this new universe is anti-gravitational, or if it still gravitates, it is around the whole of the real, around the whole of the imaginary. One does not see an alternative cosmos, a cosmic folklore, or exoticism, or a galactic prowess there. One is from the start in a total simulation, without origin, immanent, without a past, without a future, a diffusion of all coordinates, mental, temporal, spatial, signalectic. It is not about a parallel universe, a double universe, or even a possible universe. Neither possible, impossible, neither real nor unreal, hyper real. It is a universe of simulation, which is something else altogether. And not because Dick speaks specifically of simulacra. Science fiction has always done so. But it played on the double, on doubling or redoubling, either artificial or imaginary. Whereas here, the double has disappeared. There is no longer a double. One is always already in the other world, which is no longer another without a mirror, a projection, or a utopia that can reflect it. Simulation is insuperable, unsurpassable, dull and flat, without exteriority. We will no longer even pass through to the other side of the mirror. That was still the golden age of transcendence. Perhaps a still more convincing example would be that of Ballard and of his evolution from the first very phantasmagoric short stories, poetic, dreamlike, disorienting, up to Crash, which is without a doubt more than IGH or Concrete Island, the current model of this science fiction that is no longer one. Crash is our world. Nothing in it is invented. Everything in it is hyper functional. Both the circulation and the accident, technique and death, sex and photographic lens. Everything in it is like a giant, synchronous, simulated machine. That is to say, the acceleration of our own models, of all models that surround us, blended and hyper operational in the void. This is what distinguishes Crash from almost all science fiction, which mostly still revolves around the old, mechanical and mechanistic, couple function, dysfunction, which it projects into the future along the same lines of force and the same finalities that are those of the normal universe. Fiction in that universe might surpass reality, or the opposite, that is more subtle, but it still plays by the same rules. In Crash, there is neither fiction nor reality anymore. Hyper reality abolishes both. It is there that our contemporary science fiction, if there is one, exists. Jack Barron or Eternity, some passages from Everyone to Zanzibar. In fact, science fiction in this sense is no longer anywhere, and it is everywhere, in the circulation of models, here and now, in the very principle of the surrounding simulation. It can emerge in its crude state from the inertia itself of the operational world. What writer of science fiction would have imagined, but precisely it can no longer be imagined, this reality of East German factories, simulacra, factories that reemploy all the unemployed to fill all the roles and all the posts of the traditional production process, but that don't produce anything, whose activity is consumed in a game of orders, of competition, of writing, of bookkeeping, between one factory and another, inside a vast network. All material production is redoubled in the void. One of these simulacra factories even really failed, putting its own unemployed out of work a second time. That is simulation. Not that the factories are fake, but precisely that they are real, hyper real, and that because of this, they return all real production, that of serious factories, to the same hyper reality. What is fascinating here is not the opposition between real factories and fake factories, but on the contrary, the lack of distinction between the two. The fact that all the rest of production has no greater referent or deeper finality than this simulacra business. It is this hyper-real indifference that constitutes the real science fictional quality of this episode. And one can see that it is not necessary to invent it. It is there, emerging from a world without secrets, without depth, without a doubt. The most difficult thing today in the complex universe of science fiction is to unravel what still complies, and a large part still does, with the imaginary of the second order, of the productive projective order, and what already comes from this vagueness of the imaginary, of this uncertainty proper to the third order of simulation. Thus, one can clearly mark the difference between the mechanical robot machines, characteristic of the second order, and the cybernetic machines, computers, etc., that in their governing principle depend on the third order. Second order. But one can certainly contaminate another. And the computer can certainly function as a mechanical super machine, a super robot, a super power machine, exposing the productive genie of the simulacra of the second order. The computer does not come into play as a process of simulation, and it still bears witness to the reflexes of a finalized universe, including ambivalence and revolt, like the computer from 2001 or Shalmanizers in Everyone to Zanzibar. Between the operatic, the theatrical status of theatrical and fantastical machinery, the grand opera of technique that corresponds to the first order, the operative, the industrial, productive status, productive of power and energy that corresponds to the second order, and the operational, the cybernetic, aleatory, uncertain status of meta technique that corresponds to the third order. All interference can still be produced today at the level of science fiction, but only the last order can still truly interest us. And that concludes chapter 13. On our next episode, we'll be coming back with chapter 14, the animals, territory, and metamorphosis. All of y'all who are with us, thank you very much. Really appreciate you. Want you to understand that Simulacra Simulation is some powerful, powerful material. It helps us understand the dream within the dream that many of us are living and don't even know, right? There's a certain amount of real that we need to come to terms with. We really should come to terms with real, period. But there's a certain amount of it we need to come to terms with. And this book helps us with that. Simulacra Simulation is powerful. It is the one book that is featured in the Matrix movie series. Right? Out of all of the Matrix movies, there's only one book that's featured. It's at the very beginning of the first Matrix movie, and it's called Simulacra Simulation. So I highly recommend that each of you dive into this book. Maybe you listen to the recordings the live recordings that I've done on Simulacra Simulation. Who knows what your process is, but I do recommend that you touch this book. Books like this are very, very powerful, right? So Simulacra Simulation is kind of in a class all by its own, all on its own. However, we've got other books that help you free yourself of symbols, like Psycho-Cybernetics by Maxwell Maltz. Great book for helping you free yourself of symbols. And then Simulacra Simulation helps you to free yourself of symbols. Anytime a person chooses to be free, all right, they have to accept the truth. They have to live by the truth. Okay. But then they've got to live in the reality that that truth is going to break down the prisms in their mind. right? All those different symbols that they have emotionalized, those symbols are going to be breaking down in their mind. And as they are broken down in their mind, they will become free. What they do with that free is up to them. But the point is, anyone who wants to become free, if you desire that, you have to free yourself of symbols, right? So maybe there's a certain amount of, emotional connection you have to religion. Maybe there's a certain amount of connection that you have to this or that. Maybe you have to have certain things, and those things have to be sacrificed for a period of time, not necessarily forever, for a person to be able to rewire their brain to know what is real and what isn't, right? So Simulacra Simulation helps us get there. And I hope everybody out there is getting a chance to read it. So I'm going to go ahead and take off and get me some food. Y'all be blessed and expose your gift.